Hey folks, George Leoniak with New Spirituality. I'm back with another video and I'm excited today to be talking about more on the Krystal Spiral and the Cathara grid. I did a few videos a little while back on the Krystal Spiral, introducing some new ways to look at that. And today, I've had a lot of interest with those videos, a few people posting some comments. I appreciate that. And it inspired me to go back and take a look at some of the material now that I've been really digging into the book that I've been working on. I'm about 120 pages in, and I'm at a point where some of that material with the Krystal Spiral is really relevant. So I'm going to be applying a lot of things I've been learning and really look at the geometry behind the Krystal Spiral, bringing it to life as a 3D object, and really try to understand what those images are conveying. So like I normally do, I'll be doing a PowerPoint here, and I have some slides associated with that, as well as a couple props here to describe the different forms and the shapes that we'll be encountering, as well as a little bit larger ones here. These are all going to become quite relevant to our understanding of the Cathara grid Krystal Spiral. And this is all from, teachings associated with freedom teachings are called. And the Christ code is another name that might be under. So if you look, and you'll see some of this imagery from that teaching that uses sacred geometry. I'm not going to go too much into the details of the teaching. I'm going to primarily focus on the geometries associated with it. All right, so let me share the screen here and we'll get to it. So here is, let me get this all set up first for everyone. Move that over. All right, great. So here is the just a kind of broad smattering of smattering. That's funny. Here's a broad overview of the kind of geometry that's used within this associated freedom teachings. And the Cathara grid, which is this one right here in the middle, this shape, this kind of diamond type of shape here, is one of the main units that is used, and you see here with this image here called Stairway to Heaven, that these are kind of linked together in a variety of forms, building out larger and larger until you get over to here, which is this shape here, which I believe they call the Roosh God Seed. This here is another form that I pulled off of the line called the Krystal Flower, I believe. And this is also the Krystal Spiral and the Fibonacci spiral in relationship to the Krystal Spiral. So this is pretty much a follow-up video to where I've gone with my research in regards to this. And let's dig into some of the geometry behind these, because it's really quite fascinating. It primarily comes down to another view, which I tend to call the square view, of how to look at these objects that are three-dimensional. Now, it's important that I'd like to know of anybody familiar with these teachings is how are these objects meant to be viewed? Because if they're primarily supposed to be a 2D map, let's just say, a series of line drawings that we see here, without any dimensionality, like it's radiating out in every direction at once, then, okay, this could be a nice design, two-dimensionally. But at least the way that I like to engage with this material is to look at it as 3D forms and how that fits into the other forms that we're familiar with, like a cube or an octahedron. So, what we'll do with this video is really kind of unpack the structures that are in this Cathara grid and describe them in the language of sacred geometry. And it actually adds a lot of elements to sacred geometry that are not talked about, that actually is part of a lot of the research that I've been interested in. And we're going to get to all that. But let's just take a look at one of these images here and how this was constructed. You know, this was quite easy to construct this little object, and they're just fitting these together so that they all meet in the middle. Now, the interesting thing that I found here is really that this main section here, this kind of one Cathara unit, you know, it's actually based on a square that's at the middle of it with two different height triangles coming off the top and the bottom. And this one here kind of orients inwards. And the small one here will then touch at this point. All right, that's all very simple to look at and create. Now, I've got some other images here. I'm not going to get into describing them just yet. That'll be the next slide. But I want to point out that when we put these 4 Cathara units together this way, even in their drawing here, it creates a structure in the middle that I've been working with quite a bit. I call it the soul star, but its other name is the tetraxis hexahedron. And that's a 3D form. And this, by just creating the shape here of these 4 Cathara units, we bring that together, and this fits perfectly right over top of that. Now, it's not a perfect 8-sided form, the octagon shape, because these 2 squares, this one that's like a diamond here, and this other square, which is, you know, flat on its base, those 2 are different sizes. But it makes, it fits right into this shape here. So that right there, when I realized, when I looked at this form, opened up a doorway into all the research that I'm excited about with this soul star shape, which, you know, is this form right here. So in the way you're looking at it, there is kind of like this. So that's one of the forms we'll be getting to talk about. Like I said, it's part of the tetraxis hexahedron. So, you know, when I looked at this Cathara unit, I said, okay, well, what happens if I've got one facing up? Like maybe this is like too much emphasis on just one portion of what the whole picture is. So I said, well, let's just rotate that 90 degrees. So it's facing this way. And when we put these 2 together, we get the full picture. And it very interestingly, it also creates this star cut diagram. The angles make this inside. This is another form that I talk quite a bit about in the book, and that another author has written about in a book called Patterns of Eternity, the star cut diagram. Fascinating structure, which is a 3-dimensional object, which is very cool to realize that that little structure of this little star pattern in the middle here is part of the unification of these 2 Cathara units in this way, creates a bunch of forms. And those are all down here. And I'm going to describe those in just a moment. So, yep, two Cathara units. I'm kind of surprised that the teachings of the Cathara grid, I guess I'll just call them the freedom teachings. They use sacred geometry quite a bit. They have not put these 2 together like this to kind of give you a whole sense of the picture. It's more or less giving you, in my view, kind of half the picture, because these 2 things fit together. And when you do that, you create a complete unit, in my view. So the things that you get when you're looking at this 3-dimensionally, because until this point, it primarily seems like a 2D drawing. And when I first came across this, I was trying to understand, well, what is the geometry here? That is something that is, you know, we're talking about God's creation here, that is something that's radiating and permeating out omnisciently through all space and time, that I would suppose that it would be a little more in depth of a view than a 2-dimensional drawing that just is flat on a flat surface. So we're going to take that whole system and turn it into this three-dimensional view. So what we get here in the outer form here, now this is an octahedron shape, all right? And I don't know how the freedom teachings like the Platonic solids. I've heard not some good things about how they like the traditional sacred geometry, but that's an aside. But this is an octahedron that is created by that. And right now you're looking at it as if this line is coming down, this line's over here. So this is a 2D representation that I have here of a 3D form of the octahedron here. And that now is creating the outer structure of the Cathara unit. Okay, so you know they've really, what they have here is they're just nipping off two of the sides here, and then if you place this over it, you would have more of the complete other triangle that's off the side here to create the full version of the octahedron. Now you also have another octahedron that's going to be created, and that's going to be placed here in the middle, and that's what's pushing up this section here of the other triangle, which is of that tetraxis hexahedron shape, which I call the soul star, which is a cube essentially. Let's just get to that cube first. See, the cube fits right in here like this. And now you're building these other octahedrons, which are just a little bit larger than the inside of the cube, which are creating a larger shape when you connect the lines together around that cube. So the bigger octahedron here is going to create this form, which is the soul star tetraxis hexahedron. And if you are going to take this larger octahedron, this will create a cube and octahedron compound of the two. And now that is, these all together are creating what we see for the Cathara grid unit here, just like so. Although they don't draw this second octahedron in here. So that's the center of that. And if I took this triangle here and flipped it over and put it in this space, well, then I get the whole structure. But that's just how these forms kind of interlock anyway. So it just really depends on what lines you want to focus on. Now, the only other form I'll talk about here, which we'll get to in a second, further on in the video here, is this other shape called the rhombic dodecahedron. So this is, let me back out of the share now. Just talk about some of these forms. So this form, rhombic dodecahedron, you were just looking at it. It has these sloping away faces from you. And there's 4 corners here, which are the square. And then these 4 corners are the octahedron. So if we took away the connected lines, we would essentially have this cube and octahedron compound here of the two together. And now this, if we connect those lines, we're going to get the rhombic dodecahedron. So that, in my mind, is what the largest version of the Cathara grid, if we were to encapsulate this form, this plus this, if we were to cover the whole thing up, this large shape of the rhombic dodecahedron, I'll make it black, fits right over the whole structure. So let's just talk a little bit more around, excuse me, I guess I'm not on the screen share. Let me go back to that. Almost went too far on that. Let me just back up a second and show you that again. Share screen. It's been a while since I did one of these, so let's just go back and show you that a little bit here. So the rhombic dodecahedron, that is going to combine over top of these two. And the square and the octahedron will form around their unit of one Cathara grid, rotated 90 degrees, another over top of that. So I know I'm not talking too much about the spiritual significance of their ascension process through this, but if you are going to be using this, in my mind, as a meditative tool or something to really understand something about universal consciousness and God's creation, then my feeling is entering in, understanding what these shapes are. I'd really like to know if these are what these shapes are intended to be. I have a hard time understanding what they are if they're not these forms, and I'm certainly open to other opinions. But when I look at this and piece it all together, it just fits so nicely into the sacred geometry that I'm presenting here. So like in my previous video, let's just touch upon the crystal spiral here. So here's a large unit of the crystal spiral that fits right over this large unit. And they're showing the Fibonacci spiral, which is what they call the Metatronic Death Star harness. Now, you know, that there's something just about that. I just have to do a little aside on the language that's associated with the exploration of what's being presented here with this crystal spiral. You know, it's really divisive that I find, and really doesn't open to looking at things from a variety of different angles to get a bigger picture when we join knowledge together and generate that into a place of coming from wisdom. What I find happening with this kind of doom and gloom fear around these forms is that it just really creates more confusion and disables people to really understand what these forms are and figure it out for themselves rather than just take someone else's word for it. So hopefully this video will inspire people to kind of get into looking at these forms, understanding how they're made, and getting a better sense of how these structures, at least the way I'm presenting them, seem to fit with what's being presented. And just, you know, you don't need the language that's being associated with all this division. And I think it's not really productive to the overall conversation. But anyway, so here's this fitting over top of this crystal unit. And what they're essentially doing here is also an abstraction, as I'm pointing out, because here's the completed view, and you're just taking, you know, a portion of what I showed you before, which is essentially this completed structure. And rather than just keeping it in its wholeness, we're just now going to rotate these structures around, like in this image over here. And we're going to rotate them around and kind of fit them together inside one another, kind of like Russian nesting dolls, let's just say. Here's this other one here, I guess. This one goes here first. And then we piece them all together. It looks a little bit more messy because they've erased a lot of lines here. But essentially, this will help the crystal spiral, which is an amazing spiral that follows these root 2 dimensions here all the way around, kind of the edges of a larger cube here, going all the way around and kind of following those as those rotate around. Now I'm going to show you that you don't need to just create this unit that is this Cathara unit here. You can have this rotated 90-degree unit and create this as one whole complete structure with this unit here and do the same process. So I've essentially taken the one crystal spiral unit, 2 of those, like so, and am now going to just, in this image here, bring those 2 together like this. And now we've got kind of the more complete picture, which means that that's an object that is constantly producing these spirals in all directions. The way to view this is as if it's coming towards you and away from you, this version of the spiral. My other video, and I will get to that in this video, I'm going to show you how that spiral looks like as if it's also coming from the top, the left, and the right, and the bottom here as well. And that really gives you a full picture of this cube that the crystal spiral is built around. So it's built around a cube in my mind. Other proponents of this teachings, the freedom teachings, they may say it's just rotating squares back and forth to create the spiral. But in my view, it's a cube. So that spiral is kind of radiating out towards you, and from the center, that 0 point that they're talking about. And if you visualize this as way in the distance and slowly getting larger as it's coming towards you, and now this is the largest point all the way around, well, then you could be kind of looking down into this kind of tunnel effect. And the only way to do that is not just have squares that get larger on a 2D flat surface, but to have those cubes getting successively larger, and that spiral finding the corners of those cubes that are getting larger and larger as they're rotating, coming towards you. That creates this spiral from the center out in at least 6 directions I'll show you here, but you can rotate this as many ways as you would like. Now, you can basically, you don't need to, here's the abstracted spiral piece here that I'm pointing out. So we're able to take these completed units of the soul star and place those right in there. So this red cap should also have a red portion over here, and we can construct this whole picture out of just completed soul star units. For instance, this one over here fits on that one there, and then of course we have the larger one which has the red in the bottom here, the red top here and the red on the bottom, and then those just fit right on top, just like this, fit perfectly in there. And now we're dealing with the structure, the soul star structure, that is creating all the points and locations that the crystal spiral is going to generate from. In fact, it doesn't actually ever touch these components here, but that's part of the Cathara unit. But here is as it finally makes its final pass, if it was also this one pointing to the side, it would also touch down over onto this other large octahedron, which would also then be around this one. So, that allows for the ability to get creative with some of these designs and these patterns, because doing the spiral over top of this Cathara grid unit is a really fun way to show how the center of the spiral can be originating, from the center, but we could move this to any other unit on here and the corners will touch the center. So we can kind of link and a bunch of spirals from every point in space on this grid. And many of my drawings before I revisited this over the past winter have been doing this type of thing with these types of shapes, the soul star unit and the rhombic dodecahedron, making these patterns over and over and over again. And once it integrates with the crystal spiral, it really shows that all you really need through that fabric of that creation process is those are just anchor points for the spiral to move through. And I should have researched this a little bit more before the video, but something that's coming to mind now is the scalar waves, another wave type of pattern that has been associated with the crystal spiral, and that it's another way that energy moves through a network-like matrix, and that's associated with this type of geometry, which is like 0 point in every point in space where there's that infinite amount of energy. And I could see this type of visuals really capturing that very well. It could get so involved with laying these spirals over top of one another that it would look like probably very chaotic after a while, but within it, there would be this anchoring points of how that spiral moves through and connects to all these grid points of a completed grid, where you would also have this rotated in every direction possible. So like most sacred geometry, it's trying to, define something so immense and so small at the atomic level of an interconnected reality that these drawings, even though they can get very highly complex, are just really still abstracting the information and just really pointing to a much bigger, interconnected, holistic reality. All right, so let's just move away from the crystal spiral. I'll revisit in just a little bit. This is now the Roosh God seed, and I did a little bit of reading on it. In fact, I came across this image probably about a week ago. I had not seen it before. It really kind of stoked my curiosity about this information again. And so, I created it quite easily here to just see how the points relate to these circles, and instantly saw that, they're dealing with a kind of square view of, it's a square view of an octahedron with another octahedron if we connected all these points. So we're pulling out certain information from this and kind of draw lines where we like to, with leaving other lines out. So within the teaching, I'm sure this has a lot of significance. The one thing I came across was when you get down to the center of the first creation God seed moment, this is what's there. And yeah, I could see that. This is a amazing structure. When you go further and further into the drawings, at some point, you'll be coming down to just working with what I've come across, these octahedron-shaped units. And as I see them as two three-dimensional images of these spheres also having another layer of spheres beyond them, it allows for some, contemplation. And also some inspiration for the drawings that fit it into larger and larger patterns, as well as smaller and smaller units and patterns. For instance, this drawing here, which is replicating one of the ones earlier in the book, as you get walk through the steps of the creation process of the stairway to heaven through the teachings that this type of Cathara unit is associated with. Like I did before, those are mostly done with this half a unit, which I'm calling it. The completed units, when you put them together, create this larger structure, which is based on octahedral geometry with cubes and small little rhombic dodecahedrons kind of fitting together. And those units are now at very small levels, now fitting into all the space in between this unit, and will also then, once again, provide the anchoring points for the center of these circles, or anchoring at the corners of these. And of course, these circles could also extend on and on and on as well. So those spheres are also confined to these locations, at least the way that I see it. But remember, now we're dealing with the same underlying geometry that I was previously showing you. And I think that's a neat thing about this, the system of geometry here, is that it all links together because it's all based on this view. So these nodal points that are from this Roosh God seed are connecting to the anchor points that you would expect in the cubic structure and cubic octahedral structure that's being created here. And the spiral will follow that, of course, as well. These spheres or circles, I see them as a sphere that's three-dimensional rather than just being two circles that are drawn on this image, would be showing where the octahedron, this large cube or large square that you see around here, is actually projecting towards you. It's coming towards you and away from you, as well as up and down and left and right. So that is a sphere that's containing the whole structure here of this. And now that is at these little micro levels as well and creating larger. So it's a completely holographic view, and one that I find, as I've discovered prior to even really diving back into these teachings that are being presented through this material, that octahedral cubic structure is just foundational to all this imagery of representing a kind of holographic, united, holistic, universal picture. And of course, that includes the cube octahedron and the 64 tetrahedron grid and the rhombic dodecahedron. All these forms. You just, what do you want to pull out of the matrix to highlight, basically, to talk about something? And that's what everybody, many people do who study this, is focus on particular pieces to highlight certain elements to describe their research into this or their relationship with it. So yes, this square cube octahedric view is really neat. And the most important thing that I would like to get across here is that it is it's just another view of the hexagon view. And that's what I don't understand about the teachings that are associated with the geometries. When I take away the teachings that are associated with them and really focus on what I perceive as the geometries of this material, I see a beautiful arrangement that really is talking about God's creation, and it's from one particular angle that it's being described, which I call, I've been describing here as this square cube octahedron view. So I could draw the hexagon view and show you, but I decided just to make it out of, structure here of these Zoom tools to show that, this Roosh God seed head here, when we place this over top of this structure, these circles that we see here would connect around the outer forms of this shape here. So they're kind of connecting the dots, and in the center of each of these negative space in the middle, there's a center of each of these structures, these kind of squashed octahedron shapes, which create a bigger octahedron. So this is actually made up of rhombic dodecahedrons with the square in the middle, kind of going like this. And this is the octahedron, and there's another one here. So this, if we draw circles, and I should have done this for the video, if we draw circles around this, this is going to create the Vesica Pisces shape throughout all of this, but from the square view. So we've got that orientation going, and in the center of each of these, we'll be able to create this little network of lines that are associated with the God seed that was described previously with this material. Now, because there's such a backlash against anything with hexagon, I mean, I just saw some video the other day that 60-degree angles are bad. I mean, all we have to do to create a 60-degree angle and see a hexagon, because this is the same yellow structure here, is simply just rotate that structure, rotate it just, a little bit to the left and a little bit down, and bam, it's showing a hexagon and all those rhombic dodecahedrons. And it's just providing another view. So there's no point, in my view, in that the daisy of death, which they're calling this flower of life pattern here, is necessary, because we're just looking at the same view of this awesome system, from another angle. And when we look at it from another angle, we're going to see that all these spaces, which are just one dot, actually have a few dots behind them. There's more back behind each of these that are only being seen from one angle because it's three-dimensional to me. If it's not, well, then the people who develop this have to just talk about it as two-dimensional structure, just two-dimensional drawing, because if it's going to start to have some geometry to it, unless there's something new about this geometry that creates 3D structure or 5D or 6D or whatever D they would like to put on it, I'd like to know what it's creating, that I can pick up and uh, observe and meditate and look at it from another angle rather than just locking me into a flat view. So I made these larger circles because the way this fits, based on the measurements, is these circles would then create these Vesica Pisces shapes that would host the little spheres, which are not matching the colors here. I just came up with another color scheme here, but they would be in between the main nodal points that we see of the image below it. So this is the flower of life pattern here with the seed of life within it. And these little structures here are these spaces that now are in between these. And I really looked at this object. Let me get out of the screen share again. Make sure to put it on again. So I looked at this object here quite a bit to see what happened when I was going to rotate it from the view that you're looking at now. So within the center spot of this and all these little openings that you see, you would create the that Roosh God seed design. Now, if we just rotate this a little bit this way and then drop this down to this, like this, well, now it looks probably a little obscured as a hexagon here, but if we got further and further away, you would see that these lines would just create a hexagon pattern, which is basically made out of these rhombic dodecahedrons. So, in fact, the drawing of that Roosh God seed drawing is a rhombic dodecahedron that's at the center of this. There's some on the side here, and then the top of it, which is here, all it needs to do is be completed, top, sides, and you would just have a larger rhombic dodecahedron. So even the drawing is just depending on what we want to focus on. You know, what do we want to highlight in our drawing and make relevant? And that's what sacred geometry is. We can pull anything out of it and develop any programming system or language we would like to it. And we can nip off corners, we can apply corners and make it look very different than the overall complete structure of that matrix. Now, I know for people who are, oh, almost forgot the screen share again. Let's do it. I know that people who are really into these teachings feel that this is a very dichotomous, a very controversial subject that I'm bringing up here, because there's such perspective on this flower of life pattern and this other view. So I'm really entering into this conversation, presenting this work here, and hopefully stimulating some conversation, and other people who know this material a lot better than I do can shed some light on what it is that they're perceiving here from a geometrical perspective beyond the language that's associated with it, meaning that I know there's a very voluminous amounts of information that describe these images that are of a subjective quality. And so I'm wanting to have more of a conversation around what the geometry is besides the 2D drawing that I see. And this is my best attempt to look at it three-dimensionally. And it's been pretty interesting because it fits quite into a lot of the other things that I've been studying. So this isn't a one-sided, one-way conversation. Hopefully inspire some dialogue. And if you're new to the subject, maybe it will provide some insight to look at this material from a new angles and see just how beautiful I find that I'm finding it to be, and maybe you'll find how beautiful it is when you look at these drawings of how expansive they are and how interconnected it is. So I think it's great. I'm really excited about the geometries within this, and just want to make sure that the other material that is sacred geometry knowledge is also seen within the same context, and there's no need for separation. So here what I've done is I've taken the crystal spirals and done a bunch of them with one at the center, and taken that same image and of the crystal spirals going in all the directions using the method that I've been using, and plugging them in basically to create the node points for the Roosh Godseed. So there are no straight lines other than the ones that I connected with these node points here that create this formation, which is quite large compared to our other image, because I had to get a little bigger just to show how voluminous this gets when it expands out all through that spirals going left, right. Well, here they're just going front and back. I'm going to show you what the up and down looks like here in a second, and to the left and right. So this is going towards you and away from you. And I'm anchoring these at different points within this big spiral pattern. So I can do this at every point in this grid, and these spirals will continue on. And if this has something to do with this scalar wave technology, I imagine the people who are researching this would find these graphics pretty interesting to visualize how dynamic the spiral is when it's unified in a whole perspective rather than looking at it as one spiral. When we look at it, just a little artistic view of this, I just found this to be pleasing to perceive. Saw that the yellow lines here creating a little bit of a bigger, larger around those curves just really gives me some depth to this drawing, you know, that it's expansive in the directions of the spiral. And I can find where the cubes are in here and the octahedrons, and I can see the larger ones. And it's so cool because it's just created out of spirals from the center to center to center to center, all the way out. Now picture that multiplied on top of each other over and over again, and we have kind of a spiraling pattern of creation. So, you know, just to go back there, like it's the square view, looking at it from this angle is just a lot easier to do that with than the hexagon view that we're seeing over here. So, you know, it's hard to, because here the cubes that we're seeing underneath are kind of angling, slanting on a slope away from you and down. So it just makes that a little bit more difficult to see how that spiral, or at least to draw it coming out the sides. But in the square view, I am able to show how this spiral here going up mimics this same pattern that's going like this. So now what I've done here is showing you how this octahedron, the blue ones, are expanding inside a cube that is getting larger from the center. And this, I basically revisited my crystal spiral video that I did previously, tightened it up a lot with this material, redid the drawings, made sure that it all fits. You don't even really need the octahedrons in these. You can nest cubes with inside cubes. This cube, what you have to picture here, and maybe this will work with this on screen. Let me come out here real quick. If this cube is this large, the cube that's behind it is going to get smaller and be turned this way. And then the cube that's in that one is going to be smaller than that one. It's going to go back to that. And then the other one in here is going to go back to that, and like that. So if we pictured way back here, boom, 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 getting bigger and bigger and bigger as it's coming towards you, of course, that's staying in the same spot and expanding out and out and out. But you have to remember that one of the views in that image that I'm showing you is the cube on its edge that's matching up with the cube that's facing you this way. And the spiral is going to kind of originate from the center here, connect up to the corner, and then it's going to rotate to the next bigger cube and circle up to that edge. And then it's going to rotate again, and it's going to connect to another edge, rotate again, connect to the other edge, rotate, and it's going to follow the edges of the corners in all directions as that cube is expanding. That's what I'm trying to illustrate in this drawing, as if you picture this this cube. Let's just focus on the one without the octahedron. This is the back corner of the cube. This is way back there. This is the edge facing you. And now it's swooping into the structure here to here. And now it's starting to descend towards you, turning the corner back here at these smaller cubes. And there's 11 of these little segments that it's making the turn on, 11 corners of the cube that it's touching as it's going, swooping back in, doing its final little twist, and kind of coming back to the center. Now, the center point in this, you know, I just did that whole thing, and the screen share is really getting me again. Let's do it again. Sorry. Now I believe I'm on, because this is a kind of an important element. So so here we go. This is the large cube. Let's just view these as cubes now rather than octahedrons. And this edge right here is, let's say that's far away from you back here. And that edge is there. You're facing over here. You're at the side. Your head is looking at this, going this way. And now if you're facing it straight on, like this edge, this is what it looks like. So that's in the distance, and it's swooping down, touching these corners of the cube, connecting to here, which would be this one, what's on the side. So and then it's swooping over to here, which is going to be this one, which is the cube facing you. And then it's swooping to the cube on its side over here, which is going to be right in the middle here. So these two drawings, I mean, they're really, you'd have to kind of study them and look at them quite a bit to kind of visualize that. But this is far away from you. It's getting larger and larger and larger, like it's following here, swooping back in, connecting back, and then circling back to the center. And that's what the crystal spiral looks like from the top down. And now you can do that from all directions. You can do it from the left, the right, up and down, and create that. So now you have 6 directions represented out of the cube, and having the spirals come out of the cube that way. And just to show that these two fit over top of one another, the cubes are the same size. We're just rotating them around. So those cubes fit over those. And even though this spiral looks like it's going higher, if we were to flip it on its side, you see that its actual height is only going to this. It's just radiating out towards you. So let's just see. I think, yes, one other piece here that is important is this is the rhombic dodecahedron shape. This is the cube that's in here. When it's turned to the side is one view. See, that's the octahedron that meets up at the top. That's the cube on its side. So just to show you that that is this cube octahedron compound, which looks like this. There's that cube edge, and I rotate it this way, and now it looks like the octahedron's wide in a regular cube. So that's what's going on with that one as it gets larger and smaller. And this just illustrates, see if I can get this a little larger. That's just illustrating the rhombic dodecahedron from those two views. That's the underlying lattice that's in between them. And if we pull out that lattice of the cube and the octahedron, we get this diamond rhombic shaped faced 12 sides dodecahedron, rhombic dodecahedron that is kind of one of the root units. Just some experimental stuff here that I was doing. Yep, I was starting to focus on the Christ star. I'll just do or the Christ flower here, which is built on a true octagon, meaning these two are the same size squares on this. And we finally get there in this structure when I started to rotate these two cubes around. And if I take those spirals that I did that are going up and down, I can create some really interesting, neat shapes when I bring those together to fit into this form like this. So, you know, there's a lot of neat, new, beautiful geometry that I'm finding coming out of my exploration with the Krystal Spiral, and looking forward to more discoveries with it. Here's those radiating towards you, radiating up and down in a bunch of other directions. So let me stop the share and add some final comments to this. So I appreciate it if you made it this far in the video. I hope you found this topic interesting and that it shed some more light on unveiling some of the mystery behind the geometry presented in the Krystal Spiral and Cathara grid. I know it's certainly been really revelatory for me, and also connecting it to the geometries that I've been familiar with. And you know, the forms, I would say I'm really excited about the book. Like I said, I'm 120 pages into it. This came at the right time. There's been a lot of interest, people messaging me about the Krystal Spiral. So I'll be concluding probably a good 10 to 20 pages just on the Krystal Spiral in the book that have come out of these videos, because it applies and connects to all the previous work that I've been doing with sacred geometry. In the back of that book, I'm going to have a bunch of cutout forms. I guess the lighting on this is not great. Cutout forms like these that I've all made so that people will be able to just with paper make these types of forms. It really helps to get into the 3D building of them and to get off the page of just the 2D work and see it in hand and looking at it from all the angles really helps with the process of understanding the form. So I guess the only last thing that I'll say here is just to reiterate some of the comments I made in there. I'm very appreciative of the work that's presented in the Freedom Teachings from the geometrical perspective. And I just don't value the negativity associated with it that just continues to enhance separateness and divisiveness. And I'm hoping that this video just inspires a little bit of a dialogue around the things that have been presented here. And I'm very much open to engaging in that conversation to just get a better understanding of what is presented there. And you know, I apologize if there's some inaccuracies within what I've presented, and hoping that you appreciated the video, and looking forward to the next time we come back on. Nettie and I will probably be doing another new conversations video coming up in the future, so I'm look forward to that. Maybe we'll discuss some more of these topics on that. All right, so peace everyone, much love to you all, and till next time, have a great rest of your day.